Anyway, welcome everybody to our February conference call. My name is Zach Smith. I'm a product and training specialist at Growers. The call this month primarily is going to be with Mike Bolsher. He's a longtime DM. He's been on the call quite a bit in the past, or been on the conference call quite a bit in the past. He's DM from Ohio. His dad started with the company decades ago. So Mike grew up with this stuff, and he pretty routinely runs some trials on his own farm in Western Ohio. But as usual, we will start with Jim Hallbeisen, our Director of Research, giving some updates and current events. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, you got me, Zach?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, real good, guys. I'm with Chris Coles, and we're west of Chicago on I-80, trying to put some tracks behind us right now. We came out of eastern Minnesota, got over into Wisconsin, and things were cruising along pretty good, and then all of a sudden, we got into some serious rainfall. I talked to Dave Armstrong on the way down, and he said that it had kind of gone north of him, and man, we hit everything. I mean, I've not seen a lightning show like that for quite a while. A little unusual here in February, and then super heavy rain, and then fair amount of hail was accumulating on the road. Chris did a great job. He had his hands full with this thing. His traffic was pretty heavy as we got down around Madison.
We've lost you, Jim.
Making the movement it doesn't seem to have as much on the road at this point. Well, I should say, yeah, you still got me, Zach?
Yeah, you're back now. We lost you for about 5 or 10 seconds.
Okay. Again, it must be we're working between the towers on 8. So that
Yeah.
usually when I have phone calls, usually 80 is pretty good. As we get closer to Chicago, we're still out here in the boonies a little bit, and we're getting closer. So hopefully that'll hang in there. So you just jump in if you lose me again, but we should be okay. I hope. But what we did is we started out in South Dakota, went to North Dakota, worked with Keith Shutt, then we backtracked down into Minnesota, working with Scott McIver, Lauren Sherbing, and all those meetings were very well attended. Guys are mad, price of milk sucks, price of corn is not where they'd like to see it. Luke Griffith, who is a rep for us and handles non-GMO seed corn, he said, the corn orders are down for him. Guys are trying to decide what to do, and we encountered some of that ourselves with the product. Guys are going to want to do business, but they're trying to figure out this money situation. So again, I think it's all the way through agriculture. At our Friday call, the gentleman in New York was telling me some of his contacts in Indiana are talking about some of these lenders telling operators that they're going to have to cut quite a bit out of their operating budget. And that seems to be something that's penetrating all through agriculture. The thing we saw up in Minnesota and North Dakota was weather. Guys were happy with what they ended up with because a couple of them told me they didn't think they were going to get anything. And then they were able to get some rain and turn in a fairly decent crop. And it's, again, the haves and the have-nots. The spottiness of this rain was very significant. That everybody's talking about that, no matter where we go. So again, this is something that our area has had to deal with. The thing I find very interesting at these meetings is Keith Shutt sent me an article back toward the beginning of January. The title of this thing is Carbon, Oxygen, and Hydrogen Fertility in Corn Production. See, at my meetings or the meetings that I present, I talk about, what's the job of the farmer? The job is to produce sugar. We've got a special effect on society because society needs us to trap sunlight energy and turn it into something useful. And see, you could lay in the sun all day long and you're not going to gain any energy. You have to eat a green plant or eat an animal that ate a green plant. And this particular article is pretty interesting, talking about 85% of the seed itself, which is really how Mother Nature propagates herself, is starch. And that builds up the seed to fertilize the endosperm, which is the live portion of the seed. So the discussion is, where does this starch come from, or what is starch? It's just concentrated sugar. And see, the plant is storing sugar constantly, waiting to get physiologically mature to put that package together. And the thing that I tell the guys at the meeting is, hey, Google the chemical composition of sugar. And I've done it several times. And what's it show you? C12H22O11. No NPK. So why is this fertility factor such a big deal? And see, the whole industry is starting to look at that pretty significantly. This idea of synthetic compounds, fertility or fertilizer, being a problem getting into the environment because it's just being overdone. See, this has made the establishment start looking at it totally different. In other words, they're starting to talk about soil health. What are we doing with cover crops? What are we doing with no-till, not trying to destroy the mycorrhizal fungi that's in the soil? And see, as a company, we've been using the calcium to aerate the soil to get the proper symbiotic microbes, and then toxify the soil with metals out of fertility products or chloride out of fertility products. See, that's drawn a tremendous amount of interest, guys. People are very interested in it because it's a different approach. They never thought of it this way. And see, this particular article was composed or presented by Corteva AgriScience.
We lost you again, Jim.
I think they're going to try to short circuit that. They realize that this a problem with synthetic compounds getting into the environment is an issue for agriculture. And they're going to try to get in on this action. And I think it's basically going to be genetic modification. They're going to try to modify this corn to fix nitrogen just like a legume. And they're going to suggest to the farmer that, hey, you can cut back on that synthetic nitrogen, which is going out into the environment. And then they're going to bring up to the fact that, it's pretty expensive too. The only problem as farmers, we got to realize they're going to grab that profit. Are we going to pay $1,000 a bag for seed corn once they get this genetic modification going for the fixation of nitrogen? And see, my whole issue with that is it's a business model, guys. So we've got to try to figure out how to short circuit that and keep that money in our pocket. The other issue that we talked about at these meetings are the surge towards, biological life in soil. Everybody wants to talk about fulvic acid. Everybody wants to talk about humic acid, which again, these are just sugar products that they're using to try to invigorate the biological life in soil. And then they're actually bringing in microbes to try to replace or add to what's in your soil to begin. And see, in my opinion, this has created a problem for these guys because the complexity in the soil and the experience we have with the people at the microbiometer is saying, look, you've got all the microbes you need in your soil to begin with. And additions of foreign microbes aren't going to work very well with the native ones. You've got to invigorate what you already have. And see, that's the whole premise of the growers program. Actually, some of the guys are saying you stuff those foreign microbes in there. Locals or the native biology are going to use them as a feed source, and you're going to get a little bit of pop out of that. But long term, it's just not gonna, it's gonna go the other way for you. And in many cases, we're seeing that happen. But the establishment not understanding, the biological life in soil, they're a little concerned about this because they're behind the 8 ball on it. So some of these products that have used extensive advertising to try to sell their product, they put a scare into the establishment. And so what have they done? They've just come after them and tried to negate anything that they're saying. And the guys up in North Dakota, I told them, North Dakota State is really one of the ones that have really gone after them. University of Minnesota also. And they've made some mistakes doing that. The guy from the University of Minnesota said, well, that company says cut back on your nitrogen and you still maintain a decent yield. He said, well, you could cut back on the nitrogen without adding the bug in the jug and still get pretty decent yield because you're putting on too much to begin with. Well, I'm sure his head of the department had a little chat with him in the office that kind of discussion can't continue. And see, we have talked about that. You get that calcium on, basically get the aeration in the soil, and a lot of our guys start to whittle back on that nitrogen. That's all throughout the organization. And then when you come in and foliar feed for growers, between knee high and pre-tassel, you're not putting a lot of nitrogen on, but you're putting it on the plant when the utilization is at a maximum. So your ability to whittle back on what you're putting in early in the season can be, pretty sizable, significant. So again, that part of it is always been part of the program. See, I think the establishment, when they start getting in something that they're not quite as familiar with, they basically start lashing out at the newcomers and what they're trying to promote. And see, the thing with some of these products, particularly the nitrogen fixers, originally some of those guys were saying, hey, just keep your nitrogen the same, add our product, your yields will go up. Well, that didn't work. And see, a lot of our guys looked at it totally different. If this stuff's going to work, I want to cut my synthetic nitrogen back. And see, a lot of those companies have turned to that kind of approach. And one of the things that they've also done, some of the guys are telling us, is now they've increased the volume of the species that are in their bug in the jug. And of course, that brings a higher price with it too. See, and the thing we point out at the meetings is when I graduated from South Dakota State, they were telling us in a teaspoonful of soil, you had about 10,000 species of microbes in there. Well, today, the science of that is basically they're looking at maybe 300 billion. So if you've got a bug in a jug with 80 different species, how much effect that's going to have on that 300 billion is, pretty questionable. See, and we're trying to isolate the key species in there just by balancing the environment. Get that air in there and then don't toxify it with metals. And see, we think that's a very good plan to get the symbiotic microbes to be productive, for the crop itself. And the interest in that is pretty significant in the meetings that we conduct, guys. Our guys that have been with us for a long time, they're trying to get a handle on what the real science is. And then guys that are new to us, that have seen something in the field. We had a guy up there in Minnesota that, man, he's right down the line with University of Minnesota. But he had a bean field that wasn't doing the job, and they're telling him 600 pounds of potash, and our guy got him put on 4 or 5 ton of high cal line, and he couldn't believe it. See, again, that's the type of thing that we're stressing to guys. Got to get the strips in there, man, and let the soil talk to you. So, and then very interesting, one of the reps that's working with Lauren Sherping, his brother-in-law smoked off some beans with Pursuit, and he called up Lauren's rep and said, hey, man, I smoked them off. He says, you think this stuff could help it if I foliar fed it? course, the new rep, he's, well, they say it should help. So he went out there and sprayed, and the new rep went to a funeral in his brother-in-law's area. And he said, he took me to the field. He said, I was amazed. He said, they looked great. You could tell they had been smoked early in the growth cycle. And I asked his brother-in-law what he thought. He said, I couldn't believe it. He said, once they were torched, I just got out there, foliar fed a couple gallons, used some water, and man, he said they snapped out of it, and he was quite happy. He ran in the mid-50s with it, where he thought after he torched them, it was going to be a little bit of a problem for him. So again, when we have stuff like that happen, these guys come to these meetings, and man, they really want to hear what we got to say. So the goal is, hey, when they're ready to talk, man, we want to be credible. That's a big issue. We got a gentleman this evening, man, having trouble with his cows, and we're trying to get him to get that calcium on there. Lauren's talking to him about foliar feed that alfalfa. What we want to do is talk to him about that potassium-calcium ratio. And again, he's struggling with that because he relies on the nutritionists for everything. And again, they're not giving him the data he needs to know. So again, Lauren will get in there with his new rep. They'll sit out and have a nice little chat. And Lauren's got a lot of confidence that he can really help this guy. He's got some kind of problem with losing cows. I think his blood's alkaline. They tried to save one. The vet had him use calcium to try to save it. Well, he didn't get the job done. So again, it could be a phosphorus issue because we've seen in the past when you get that alkalized blood, the phosphorus isn't solubilizing either into the tissue. So again, there's a lot of things we've got to talk about, but it's coming down to a quality issue. And this farmer, he's starting to buy into that because he's getting the runaround from both the nutritionist and the agronomist. They're throwing everything at the kitchen sink at it. They're not making any headway. So again, that's where Laura does a fine job. Very credible, got some experience. This guy is very interested in what we're talking about. So we're going to get an audience with him, but we'll just see how it goes from there. That new rep, he's jumping in the deep end right away. So he's going to have to start picking some things up to try to carry on that credibility. There's a lot of questions going on.
Sounds like you're in a video game, Jim.
Especially if you got to cut a couple $1 million out of your operating budget. Guys they've got some issues. So that's all. All I got, Zachy. We're going to be hitting Chicago here pretty soon, so I don't want to take Chris's concentration off the being between the lines.
No problem. Thank you, Jim. All right, we will move on then to the next portion of the call, which is Mike Bulsher. Mike, I'm going to put up the screen share, the calendar picture to kind of give you a frame of reference. But Mike's done some trials on his own farm, does them quite often, so I'm going to let him share about them.
I think you're giving me too much credit there.
All right, well, I'll tone it down. That Mike sucks at farming. Don't listen to him. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, it's interesting. Looking back now, I didn't know he's going to take pictures and put them in a calendar here because there's some things that I did that I didn't send off to the company. I wished I would have taken some pictures of. But down here, I'm just northwest of Dayton, Ohio, about 40 miles. And this area down here, normally we don't plant until about the very last week of April or first week of May is whenever we start generally planting, if we can get in the field. And the reason for that is we get some pretty, I don't want the word for it, undeterminate weather until we get into May. A lot of times we'll get some nice weather and then some cold, wet weather, or maybe even some snow yet. So we always felt it was the safest to wait till the very end of April, first part of May to start planting. But 2023, when these pictures was taken, I had a neighbor down here on April 15th that had 600 acres of corn planted. And that's just unheard of. We had a very dry spring and it was kind of warm that week. And we hadn't had rain for a while. And guys were going crazy because they thought that when it did start raining, it wasn't going to quit. And, you know, it's kind of, they always say one extreme follows another. And I guess I wasn't going to go until it was time. I figured I was going to wait till it was right. And then finally, I guess they got to me. And I thought, you know what would be the harm in planting a field? So I had a field out here east of the buildings that I had plowed it up last fall. And anyway, I decided, well, I'm going to level that thing off and plant it. I'll have 20 acres in. And that'll be a good test. And if the weather turns bad and it don't come up, then I'm only out 20 acres. Okay. So I felt maybe that was a lot wiser than trying to do 600 acres. And there was quite a few guys in the area that not everybody was planting. There were some guys that were just getting everything ready, just fitting it up because the ground conditions was perfect. So these pictures on here really was a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of just not sure what was really going to go on. And I thought, what the heck, while I was out there, I got this phone, I'll take some pictures. But the day I planted this field, it was between 75 to 80 degrees. It was just a beautiful sunshiny day and dust was a flying. You wear your t-shirt out there working. Pretty nice for the 20th of April. That's when I finally decided I was going to plant this field. And I went ahead and planted the field, worked up beautiful, planted the field, 6 gallon of growers in furrow, just like I always do. Nothing else was applied. And by the way, this field here, I don't recall the last time a soil test was even done on it. So if I don't really even remember if I'd done any soil testing on it. It did have 10 ton of lime put on it here about 5-6 years ago, I think, maybe 17, 18. Yeah, probably about that time I put 10 ton of lime on this field and just grown crops and use the product and do like we always do. But anyway, I planted that field. And the first 4 days, weather wasn't bad. I think we got another field worked up and ready. And then, of course, they was saying rain was a coming. So, and it was supposed to cool down, and it did. It cooled down. It got down in the 20s and 30s at nights and high, in the 40s during the day. And of course, there I had that field planted. So I was starting to think, well, it's a good thing that's all I planted, because I'm only out that one field. And I think a week went by and we had some wet weather. Actually, it was way too wet to get in the field and it was pretty cool. So I went out there one evening and just dug up a little bit in the row, picked around at it and looked at the corn, and it was just sitting there. Wasn't nothing going on with it, which, weather wasn't really conducive to do that. But I think, and then I got this thermometer I stuck in the ground. And when I stuck that thermometer in the ground that time, I found this where I wrote down what it was. It was like 38 degrees, the ground was. So it was pretty cold at that particular time. And it might have been in the morning when I'd done that. That time I stuck the thermometer in there. But I think, a week or two went by and I dug it up again, about the same thing. Nothing much was going on. And the photo taken on May 3rd, I was thinking, no, it wasn't 20 days. But anyway, I might have dug it up that evening and stuck the thermometer in the ground at the same time. And I thought, wow, I'm getting a little sprout on there. That's pretty amazing. And at that time, the temperature of the ground was 44 degrees. I'm got my finger there kind of pointing at showing the root, because what I did, I took that picture and I think I sent it to Jim. Looky here, because the day that I was planting that, I sent him a picture and he said, "Oh, you're pulling the trigger too quick." So that was just another reference. Hey, look, I finally got a sprout. So anyway, then the next picture there was May 11th, and the corn was just coming up. And I hadn't sprayed any kind of herbicide or nothing on it yet. You can kind of, if you look close enough at that picture, you can see some weeds coming up with it. But the corn was coming up, and I think at that point there we was, I think that was the one I was getting close to 20 days before I really start seeing it coming up in rows. And it wasn't up all everywhere. And I think this May 13 one, that's what they're showing there. I run a rotary hoe over the ground because there were some spots out there I was getting a little bit nervous on, but I ended up with that field not having to replant anything. And it did come up pretty decent. And I did get it sprayed at that time. But anyway, moving on there, the 29th, the May 29th, that was another field of something that you're not supposed to do. I had that in wheat and decided to plow it up, just chisel plowed it and worked it and planted corn. And that picture of corn there, that's the middle picture. That does not have any nitrogen on it, just growers. And that's probably been in the ground. That particular field there was probably in the ground maybe 2-3 weeks at that point. That was like the next field that I planted. And I guess I was just impressed with how uniform it was and how nice it looked with just growers, 6 gallon of growers in furrow, nothing else yet. And generally what I do, I think, well, I tell you what, that was when I was getting ready to, put nitrogen on at that point. And I took the picture right before we put it on. I believe that's the way that one went. But at any rate, this year I got kind of a surprise. I usually just put the 6 gallon on. I put 100 pounds of actual N on of 28%, usually when we side dress. And then a pre-tassel, I have a guy come in with a plane, a neighbor, and he'll foliar my foliar spray on at that point. We'll put 2 gallon with NA on. And his wife passed away couple years ago, and I thought he was going to quit on me, and this happened late in the year. And I told him, I said, if you ever decide to retire, make sure you let me know early enough so as I can get somebody else to put this foliar application on, or I'll have to drive out there and spray it on myself. But I said, let me know before my corn gets too tall. And going on to the next picture, the last one, that's what I was showing there. And I don't really necessarily recommend it for the reason it looks nice in the picture. I'm spraying that with a 2 gallon rate at 15 gallon total volume, but 2 gallon of growers per acre in NA. And that corn was higher than knee high. It wasn't quite waist high, and it looked a little rough on the ends turning around. And it's kind of why I don't recommend that. I kind of would have liked to spray that a little sooner, but he let me know at the last minute that he was not going to spray this year. So that's why I went out there and sprayed it that morning. But that field that on June 21 that I'm showing with the foliar application, that's the first field. That's the field I planted on April 20th. And that was on June 21. You can see how that corn has really come on. That corn really looked good. Planting it that early, it went through a lot of stress. But yeah, it was getting tall. Well, that big shot of rain and then the heat we got right after that, then it really started coming on. And I just took that picture and shot it in there to growers, telling them, I was just showing them I was foliar spraying with that corn being that size. And that's just a pull behind boom sprayer. And with a pull behind, you generally, when you turn around on the ends, you'll run more on. So that's why I said would have liked to maybe got that on a little sooner. And I did on my other fields, but with the timing and everything, getting on at that stage was, all I could do to get across it. I'm sure I could have lifted them booms up higher, but at any rate, the hitch and the tractor, I was right down in the corn, pushing it over as I was going down through the field. So, and it shows bright sunshiny day, but actually that was a real hazy morning, and it was just ideal for foliar. And so, yeah, that's actually the May 29th and the June 21st, both them fields. They've not been soil tested or had any nutrients applied to them because of a soil test. It's just simply the growers program with the high calcium lime, and then, foliar spraying with the growers in furrows. So, and it's all conventional corn. I don't grow any kind of stacks or anything like that. I actually grow
Thanks.
seed consultants varieties, and occasionally I'll grow some Royal King corn seed. But
You there,
they
Mike?
told me this year, yeah.
Sorry, my internet's getting a little spotty for some reason. I don't know if it's I'm cutting out or if you are.
Oh, Zach, it must
Okay.
be you. Mike sounds fine to me.
All right. Well, I'm glad it's just me. Um,
Well,
sorry, Mike, then I may have interrupted you because I couldn't hear you. I thought you were done.
Well, Jim's on there. It's kind of funny. Whenever he was talking earlier, I was thinking that he's always one of the guys, he says, you guys think you got to go out there and plant with snow on the bill of your hat. I guess maybe that was a picture he should have had on there too, because that time of year, we do occasionally get some snowfall in late April. So not too often in this area do we go out and start planting then, but I did this year just because I guess the neighbors was all getting it done, and it's kind of starting to get to me. Maybe I better do something that way. At least it looks like I was trying, or make it look good. But I don't know. You got any questions on any of it?
Yeah, hey, Mike, this is Jim again. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I get the question a lot. And like I said, all the meetings we conducted this week was no different. Farmers that are, looking at no-till or are using no-till, they want to know what my opinion is on when they spread their high cal, if they should be working that in.
They want to do something. That's all I got. They want to do something.
Yeah. So the question is, I got a young guy it's on the call tonight that we just worked with up in North Dakota, and his growers rep begged him to do something, and he did something very shallow, and he felt that helped him. What's your advice to guys that like to stay in the no-till situation? What is there anything they can do? Rotary hoe, vertical disc, what's your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion ain't very favorable to what the industry's pushing. I can tell you that. And when it comes right down to no-till, my dad no-tilled for 12 years because we all left home and he didn't have no help, and he did what they call, this is the ridge till system was basically that's what he did, the Buffalo ridge till system. And the concept of the ridge till system is you're always planting in the root zone. It's supposed to be the most superior no-till, example of planting, because you never run on that row. You're always planting in the same zone, and you're using last year's decayed root system to grow your roots through. So it's supposed to give you the best rooting and the deepest rooting and all that. And he did that for years until one year he had gotten sick and turned us boys loose on the farm and out there. And because that Buffalo ridge till, it took a knack to set it up. There was a lot of adjustments on that planter and on the cultivator to use that. And we didn't quite understand it. So we went out there and spring mowboard plowed all the corn ground in the spring. And then, just getting planted it like we did, which is, I know there's a lot of people, oh, I mowboard plow, but I'll tell you, man, if you want to grow corn, especially here where I'm at, you can no-till all day long, but I'll put yields up with the poorest quality corn seed you can buy, and you can mowboard plow it and get a whale of a crop of corn. You can in this area. And to this day, I guess, just this year, my best yield was on spring mowboard plowed ground was my best yields this year. And I grow every acre of corn the same way. I put 8-gallon of growers on there and 100 pounds of N. And if you're going to go to no-till, the guys around here, they can't get below 140 or they don't get any yield whatsoever. They're using more than just a pop-up fertilizer. In many cases, they're putting 20-gallon of N on when they plant, and then coming back through either once or twice afterwards with more N to be able to get a yield. And I've been in them fields around me and look at ours, and I'm not impressed. And I'm surely not going to do nothing like that unless I'm forced into it. And then it's going to be kicking and screaming because I'm just not sold on no-till. Now, soybeans and wheat, yeah, I think it works pretty good, but I think that's a shallow rooting crop, and that's the reason why. But when it comes to corn needs roots. And what I'm finding out all the time, and I run into a scenario today, pretty much figured the same thing out with that. You got to get some roots in the ground if you want healthy plants and if you want plants to do something and produce. I got a fella that we just started in the greenhouse business down here in Indiana that the year before last, he started using growers over another product that he had, and he was impressed with the fact that it wasn't costing him much. So last year he called me up, and I didn't know him because he had bought the growers off of another customer. And anyway, he wanted to use growers, and he wanted to know how it was used and all that. So I went down there and I had him put this lime on, and he put lime in this greenhouse, and they worked it in with just shovels. They just worked it in. And last year he had a not so good crop in there, and he did everything I told him. In fact, I had him get a hold of 2 other guys that I'm working with that's just having phenomenal results growing tomatoes in a greenhouse. And this guy he had kind of a disaster, and he called me up last year, and man, we went over everything he did. I had him call my guys again. I could not figure out what was going on. He was doing everything just like they did. And this greenhouse, it was really not in any kind of, it wasn't like it was put on a row crop acreage or nothing like that. They actually put it up in an old pasture. But today I went up there because he's getting ready to start his tomatoes again. And he says, I want to use this growers one more time. He said, even though the season wasn't the greatest, he says, talking to the guys that I had him talk to, he was just impressed with what they were getting, and he just didn't know why he was getting that. So I suggested to him I'd come down there and do some soil tests just to take a look at them. I mean, I'm not somebody sold on the soil test being the answer to figure things out, but it's something. And anyway, I went in there today and I stuck that probe in the ground, and it's just like I shoved that probe in 3 inches, and it's like I hit a floor. I mean, it just even sounded like I hit a floor. So I probed around 2 or 3 more times, and he was in there with me, and he was telling me all about his plans and what he was going to do and how he's going to do some things different this year. And I said, you know what? I said, why don't you do something for me? I said, grab this probe and stick this in the ground. I said, go right where you want your soil test taken. I said, stick this in the ground. He sticks that thing in the ground, and he gets on it. He goes, man, that's hard. I said, yes, stick it in again. So he went and he stuck that in about 4 or 5 places, and he could not push that thing in the ground any further than 3 inches. And I told him, I said, you know what I think your problem is out here? He goes, well, he goes, I kind of got an idea. He says, I got a hard pan brick. And, you know, he could get in there 3 inches, but he's grown tomatoes on that last year. And he's had trouble the last 2 or 3 years, even with the product he was using before us. And I said, when was the last time you got in here and really plowed this thing or opened it up? He said, well, we never had to. We just always took shovels and worked the ground. It worked up nice and we planted. So it wasn't necessarily no-till, but I just think that, you know, these fertility problems so many people are dealing with out here are not fertility problems at all. I say that because just thinking back after I left there, going down the road, all the different times I had to deal with somebody upset about fertility problems, it was always a fertility problem. But when you dug the plants up or you stuck a probe in the ground, the same thing always happened. You couldn't get that probe in at any depth in the soil. And everybody's afraid to put this lime on out there. And I tell you, they're really missing out. And the focus is not on that at all. I never hear anybody talk about that. I mean, no agronomists talk about that. Everybody talks about what you need for fertility and the fact that you need so much fertility to grow a crop. But I think there's other things going on out there that people are not looking at. And I know the growers program, we've looked at that for years. I still think maybe we got customers out there that they haven't fully understood the fact that you got to get this ground opened up. You got to get them roots down there deep in the ground, and that certain crops need a lot of roots under them. And well, anyway, I kind of got off of the deal with the corn, but I'm seeing this more and more all the time. I seen it last year with soybeans. It's a lack of rooting, and people's you know, they just don't want to put the lime on. They just, you know, they're ingrained in this concept of pH and ruining their ground, and they can't even, you know, think of doing it in one area. I mean, what they'll find out might totally shock a lot of people if they would just think about the lime, get it on, rip that ground open, get it down in there. This fertility thing, it wouldn't be as big of a mystery as they all make it out to be if they could just get them roots in the ground. So,
Hey, Mike.
you know, that's what the no-till, and around here, I'm just not sold on no-till corn. And everybody around this area that's no-tilling, if they're no-tilling, they're running a vertical till tool over the ground in the fall and in the spring, and then they call that no-till.
So hey, Mike, I got another question. I want you to talk a little bit about what you think is the key in foliar feeding. If a guy's going to start foliar feeding, what do you talk to him about that you think he has to really pay attention to?
Well, number one, and probably as important as the fertilizer you're using, which is our fertilizer, you need a good quality water source, or a water source either with a 5 to 6 pH or a soft water, or I highly recommend rainwater. All my guys using rainwater are very happy with the results. In fact, to the matter is that they're using rainwater, most of them now, to put their chemicals on because they say they work better. You just don't have the interference with the minerals in the hard water when you use rainwater, because you don't have the hardness there to deal with, and you don't have to figure out, you know, there's so many things that you got to do if you got a hard water. I mean, you got hard water, there's all different kind of adjuvants that control the pH, lower the pH, but unless you got a pH meter, you're kind of shooting in the dark with that stuff too. And I know the the rainwater, the pond water, all that stuff is just so much more valuable. That rainwater for sure, because it's just a no-brainer. But yeah, don't spray in the heat of the day. Although I've had guys do that. If you got plenty of moisture in the root system, you may get away with it. But if it's a little dry, you'll really regret doing that because it'll fry that crop. Beck's Seed a few years ago, they did some trials on foliar feeding. I read that and thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know how accurate that is either, but they found that foliar feeding in the evening versus foliar feeding in the morning foliar feeding was far more responsive, that they seen greater benefits in yield and quality from the morning spray. Now, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know which is better, but over the years, I always kind of looked at spraying in the evening because I thought, well, there's no chance of me going out there and damaging the crop by doing that. But anymore, I usually get everything ready in the evening and go out and do it in the morning just because of reading. They do this practical farm research, they call it. And I get that stuff in the mail and I like to read it. I don't know, maybe it's just politics and what they're doing too. I don't know, but I like the foliar feeding for everything that I'm going to put through an animal. If I'm going to feed it to livestock, it's always been a rule of thumb. We dairied around here for years. Everything was foliar sprayed that we fed the cows. And I have cows now, and I don't want sick cows. I like to have my cows be as healthy as I can. And I think it's very important to feed them good quality forage and even corn for that matter. So I always foliar spray everything that I'm going to put in feed to them animals. I think that's very beneficial to them, or at least for the problems I have to deal with. I really credit a lot of that to having good quality feed to feed them.
So, hey, Mike, I want you to do another thing for me. You're headed to Louisville next week. I want you to talk to these guys a little bit about what Louisville's like, what you see down there, and what's the crowd like, and what are your expectations going to Louisville next week?
Kind of reminds you of the political deal going on now. It's just crazy mayhem. Something. It never a dull moment. I mean, there's big crowds. There's a lot of interesting things to see down there. Most of it you can't get over one day and see. There's a lot of companies. There's a lot of what do I want to say? Innovations. I mean, these big shows like that, you get the actual. It's not really so much the dealers as the companies in that show down there, the corporate businesses that are down there. And one of the things you get all these people, I guess they get walking around there and they get caught up in the hype. And one of the things that comes to mind is this Yield Center 360. He's got a pretty good area down there where he's got quite a display. And he's the guy that come up with this precision planting. Now he's on this Yield Center 360, which is nitrogen rate, variable nitrogen rate application with the Y drop. He's got these systems to do the spoon feeding. So a lot of people's interested in that, even though the expense of doing that from what they're showing is quite expensive. Where, I mean, I guess this regular agriculture industry nowadays, you can do anything you want if you got the money to afford to do it. And I tell you, 2-3 years ago, that wasn't a problem. It's going to be interesting how people's minds or what their mindset will be this year, knowing everything is where it's at in agriculture and looking at this stuff. It's a pretty glamorous show as far as what they're showing, what they're promoting. But, you want to come down to being realistic. I think we're there. I think, whenever it's all said and done, you can go out there and do anything you want out there, but we're the basic, and you can't get better results by doing the basic thing that we're doing out there. I guess that's kind of how I look at us, comparing us to most everything out there in the show. It's all about yield. Of course, agriculture is. I mean, they try to sell everything on yield out here, and people just go nuts. Yield, 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 and they spend so much money trying to get yield. I think the last thing they think of is what they're actually going to have at the end of the year to pay the bills. And in the past, that's not been a problem. But I think if the future stays like it is right now with the inflation and everything, I think it's going to be something that people are going to be concerned about. I mean, no doubt you was talking about people trying to decide about planting corn or beans. I'm hearing that myself, where people are thinking more of planting small grains and things like that, where they don't have all this expense in nitrogen, herbicides, fertilizer. You know, I mean, I hear that out here. People looking for some kind of a niche crop or something.
Yeah,
You know, look at the price.
I think, Mike, it'll be interesting to see what you hear down at the show, how guys are looking at that now with, you know, what corn has done. You know, the report came out today and they didn't do much. They raised the carryover in the States. They knocked Brazil or South America back, but not to the same extent that the experts from South America did. So really, corn is going to languish. It's going to be range bound where it's at right now, the way it looks. So it'll be interesting to see how guys respond to that next week.
Well, you know, something else that I've noticed, and as long as I've been around this, I don't grow no high powered Pioneer, whatever their best seed they got, and Beck's. I mean, they're good companies. They got good products, but I'm growing stuff that's conventional, run of the mill, low ball, cheap. I always tell my seed guys, you know, I'm a tight ass. I said, you ain't going to sell me that good stuff. And, oh, well, you got to buy that. Well, somebody's got to make money. And until that stuff quits working around here, I'm not going to buy it. But some of this, that's another thing about the basics with our program is you can grow the cheaper seed varieties and get good results with them. I mean, you know, everybody wants to put that on the seed. It's the seed ain't good. No, it ain't. It's your soil. Your soil is not in good condition. And it's not in good condition because everybody's tried going after that yield and threw everything in the kitchen sink out there too. And they're starting to think differently. Maybe we got to get this soil health in check. And they're absolutely right. If they want to stay in farming, they're going to have to get her in check. Then they can start dwindling back on some of the seed costs and the fertilizer costs and things like that. But, you know, lime's a good place to start. So, yeah, it'll be interesting what goes on. I'm kind of interested to see what everybody's attitudes will be like down there this year. I know up there at Fort Wayne here a couple of weeks ago, everything that had to do with biology and drones is where everybody was paying their most attention to, it seemed like. If it had the word biology to it.
I saw a lot of that in Grand Rapids too, in Michigan. When I was there in December.
I tell you, if you're in agriculture sales right now, all you got to do, that's what maybe we should do at growers, is put bio growers in front of it. And then maybe that'll get people's attention. You know, it is interesting how this biology thing, everybody wants to know about it. And they really don't want to, I guess they're not really asking about the biology itself, other than they want to know if you're selling biology. Are you guys selling biology? That's what I always hear.
Yeah.
And I always tell them we're trying to grow your native biology and make it work.
Yeah, I think your average Joe doesn't know a whole lot about it anyways. So they're kind of already just parroting what they've heard from the other companies, which is usually apply this, get more yield, or use less nitrogen or something like that.
But you know, that stuff's out there in the ground made to help us out. And we got to quit. We got to quit trying to kill it and let it try to work for us
Yeah,
and help us
agree.
out.
Yeah, and it's well suited to that climate, that environment, that soil type, plants that have been there. So you just promote its health, then it'll do better than any kind of botany jug, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Mike. Do we have anybody have any questions for Mike?
What was your yield, Mike, in your corn that was planted early?
Well, I'd like to tell you it's 260 bushel like everybody else says, but actually, well, I'll give you an example. Last year, my poorest field did 165. My best field did 221. I don't have, with the acreage I farm, I don't have like 250 bushel all the way across, and I'm going to tell you that these guys telling you that don't either. I mean, I probably had 250 bushel somewhere, I'm sure, but what I do is take an average, overall average of what I make, and that's the other thing too. And it's interesting that the best field I had wasn't mow-board plowed. I said that earlier. It was fall plowed, and it had 10-ton of lime put on it 3 years ago. And actually, the two fields that I mow-board plowed this year, one was a hay stand and one was a clover stand. And they was up there pretty close. They was 185. One of them was 192. And there again, 100 pounds of yield or 100 pounds of N and 8 gallon of growers. I put 6 in a row and then foliar 2. So, yeah, I can't say, well, the year before, the year before wasn't good. We had a dry year towards the last year. My corn overall averaged at that 145, 150. But I'll tell you, for what I spent to grow that crop and what I got back, I made some pretty serious bank. And, it's not always having that big yield. I think it's a whole lot of things. I don't have all this latest, greatest technology in all my equipment. I still drive my tractors. I know a lot of guys nowadays, they don't drive their tractors. I still do. Maybe I'll convert eventually. I don't know. Some of this Roll King seed's $100 a bag. That really cuts your cost quite a bit an acre out there. Over $300 a bag.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, we'll call it a night. The next call is on March 14th. We're going to be talking about Jim's farm at that point, Jim Hallbeisen, our director of research. So please tune in. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot, Mike. It's always great having you on. Thank you to you as well, Jim.
All right. Bye.
Good night, everyone.